Good evening, everyone. Today we continue Chapter 6, Part 2, the biomedical basis of chronic disease, cancer, and diabetes. By the end of this lecture, you will understand not just what these diseases are, but how scientists figure out their causes and why that matters for prevention. Now, let's start to much harder puzzle cancer. Cancer. If you remember in the last lecture, if cardiovascular disease is our success story, cancer is our humbling challenge. The reason it's so hard is captured in this phrase. Cancer is not one disease, but 100 diseases. Breast cancer, lung cancer, leukemia, they differ in risk factors, in how they look under a microscope, in how they respond to treatment. So we can't study cancer as one thing. Each type must be tackled separately. But they all share one defining feature. A cell's normal activities get transformed and it begins to grow out of control. To understand what goes wrong, we first have to understand what's right looks like, how normal cell behaves. Here is the molecular heart of cancer. A normal cell becomes cancerous through mutation in its DNA, usually in gene that controls the cell growth. When that cell divides, it passes the mutation to its daughter cells, which now divide too fast. And here is the vicious cycle. The more they divide, the more copying errors accumulate, creating more mutations and more abnormality. A snowball becoming a tumor. But a tumor doesn't just sit there. Two further changes make it dangerous. Two things turn a clump of cells into life threatening cancer. First, the tumor stimulates new blood vessels to grow and feed it. Without a blood supply, it couldn't get large. The second and most deadly metastasis. Cancer cells cancer cells maybe change from the original tumor and spread at distant parts of the body. That spread is usually what kills. The hope is that understanding these molecular steps lets us design therapies that specifically halt them. Now, the public health question. If a mutation starts it all, what causes the mutations? Three main culprits cause DNA mutation. Number one, chemical. Number two, viruses. Number three, radiation. We will take each in turn, but there is a second layer. Other factors decide whether a mutation actually becomes a tumor. Hormones, for instance, normally regulate cell growth, but they can supercharge a mutated cell. And diet plays a role too, though the mechanism are murkier. Let's start with diet, since it's the factor we have the most personal control over. Diet and cancer. Diet's role is real, but only partly understood. Some foods contain carcinogens, cancer causing chemicals, means. On the protective side, dietary fiber may help by rushing carcinogens through the gut so less gets absorbed. High dietary fat raises the risk of many cancers, though we are not sure why. And again, fruits and vegetables appear protective. You will notice that same dietary advice we gave for a heart, a healthy diet is remarkably multi-purpose. Now, the first of our three mutations causes, and the one recognized earliest, the radiation. So, radiation as the cause. Radiation linked to cancer was learned the hard way. Many early scientists who handled radioactive materials, not knowing the danger, died of cancer, including Marie Curie herself. If you remember, in last chapters, I talk about the Marie Curie, who discovered radium and died of leukemia in 1934. And her age, 66 years. Last studies then proved that ionizing radiation damages DNA and causes mutations across all life, from bacteria to mammals. And later, certain chemicals were found to cause the same kind of genetic damage and cancer in lab animals. The second cause is one we have only recently confirmed in a human, the viruses. Viruses and cancer. We have long known viruses causes cancer in plants and animals, but only recently confirmed it in humans, notably liver cancer and cervical cancer. The mechanism is clever and little chilling. The virus integrates itself into your cell own DNA, and its gene can override yours, for example, switching on cell division when it shouldn't be on. And remarkably, human cancer viruses have been found carrying altered forms of our own genes. That discovery about viruses actually unlocked a much bigger understanding of cancer genetics. Oncogenes and the tumor suppressor genes. Studying cancer viruses taught us about two crucial gene types, oncogene and the tumor suppressor gene. Oncogene normally stimulates cell division. When mutated, they drive cancer's growth like a gas pedal stuck down. Tumor suppressor genes normally turn division off. When they fail, it's like cutting the brake line. They also explain why why some why some families are cancer prone. Usually more than one mutation is needed. So a family already carrying one mutation needs only one more event to develop a tumor. They start pathway down the road. With the causes understood, let's turn to what we can actually do: preventing cancer. Primary prevention of cancer. Primary prevention of cancer means blocking exposure to the agent that cause mutation. For ionizing radiation, recognized early, we have government standard protecting us from nuclear plants, from X-ray, from radon. Sunlight is a trigger. We can't regulate the sun. So the approach is education, sunscreen, and hats. And the viruses, the response is still evolving. One powerful tool is immunization. And immunization against cancer causing viruses is one of the most exciting developments in this field. Vaccine against cancer causing viruses. Think about this. We now have vaccines that prevent cancer. The hepatitis B vaccine, given in all children, prevents not only acute hepatitis, but the chronic infection that leads to the liver cancer. And the hepatitis B virus vaccine, available since 2006, prevents cervical cancer. Since its introduction, this is must be exist. HB infection in young American women has dropped by two-thirds for one main strain and a third for another. But it's controversial because to work it must be given to girls and boys before they become sexually active, which makes some parents uncomfortable. That's a place where science and social values collide. Now, to the third mutation causes, and the most contentious one in all of public health: the environmental chemicals. Environmental chemicals and cancer. This is genuinely one of the hardest, most controversial question in the field. The clearest answer is tobacco. Its TARS cause roughly a third of the United States cancer deaths, and smoking damages far more than the lungs. Look at that long list of organs. But beyond tobacco, things get murky. People worry intensely about chemicals in foods, in water, and air. Yet, we actually know very little about how much they contribute. Most industrial chemicals have never even been tested for cancer causing potential. Food additives, for example, at least must be tested by law, and That raises the obvious question: how do we test a chemical for cancer causing potential? It's harder than you would think. Testing chemicals for carcinogenicity. There are two methods, each flawed. The gold standard is the lifetime animal study. Feed a large group of rats or mice the suspect chemicals for their whole life, about 2 years, and compare tumor rates to an unexposed group. But it's slow, expensive, vulnerable to disaster like a disease outbreak whooping out your animal. And the doses need are sometimes so huge they disrupt the animal's whole metabolism, making result meaningless. The alternative testing whether the chemically mutates cells in a dish is a fast and cheap, but not very mutagene is carcinogen, and it ignores hormones and other body level influences. So, neither method is perfect, which is exactly why this question stays so controversial. Let's move to our third major disease, one that's rising fast and is closely tied to lifestyle: diabetes. Diabetes rising the prevalence and mortality. Watch this trend. Diabetes went from 1% of American in 1965, 3% in 1995, and more than 7% up to date. That's an epidemic is in slow motion. Official, it ranks seventh as cause of death, but it's likely much deadlier than that. Only 35 to 40% of non-diabetes of diabetic had it listed on their death certificates. Many heart disease deaths are really diabetes linked. In fact, diabetic have a double to the death risk of non-diabetic their age. So the official rank understates the true toll. To understand the prevention, we need to know the two types of diabetes because they are very different diseases. Diabetes, types, complications, and prevention. Let's understand what diabetes actually is before we talk about types. At its core, diabetes is a deficiency in the body's ability to metabolize sugar, to take the sugar in your blood and move it into your cells where it can be used for energy. That whole process is normally controlled by hormone called insulin. When insulin is not working, sugar builds up in the blood with nowhere to go, and that's where the damage begins. Now, there are two major forms, and I want you to see them as genuinely different diseases that happens to share name. Type 1 Type 1 usually appears in childhood. Here, the insulin producing cells for the pancreas simply fail. The factory shuts down. The frustrating reality is that despite decades of research, we have learned very little about how to prevent type 1 diabetes. Type 2 is a different story. It becomes Type 2 it becomes more common with age, and it's more complex, mix partly the pancreas not making enough insulin, the partly the body becoming resistant to the insulin that is there. So the insulin is knocking on the door, but the cells won't answer. Both types are strongly influenced by genetics. But here the crucial public health point: type 2 is closely tied to obesity and is largely preventable with proper diet and exercise. The CDC even describes diabetes and obesity as the twin epidemics because as obesity rises, diabetes follows right behind it. And yet, this is the recurring frustration of public health. We have struggled to persuade people to adopt those healthy behavior, even though doing so would prevent not just diabetes but a whole range of other chronic diseases too. So, if we often can't prevent the disease, what does public health focus on? Preventing the disability. And this is where it gets serious. Roughly, in four people with diabetes don't even know they have it. That matters enormously because under control, high blood sugar quietly damage blood vessels throughout the body, especially in the eyes and kidneys. Look at this list of complications: blindness, kidney failure, cardiovascular disease, poor wound healing, and amputation of the limbs. These are devastating life altering outcomes. That's why secondary prevention, early diagnosis, so treatment can start before the damage is done, is so important. But there is a final, troubling layer. Managing diabetes requires long term monitoring and treatment that can be complicated and expensive. And in the United States, lack of access to routine medical care means that those who need this care the most are often the ones who have the hardest time getting it. So diabetes is not just biomedical problem. It's a problem of access and equity too. Diabetes, cancer, and cardiovascular disease are our big three, but they are not the whole story. Let me briefly acknowledge the others, and then let's step back and pull this entire chapter together. Before we close, I want to acknowledge a few diseases we haven't given full attention to because they have a major impact even though they did not get their own section. First, mental illness. It's a major cause of disability in the United States, yet, strikingly, we still know very little about its causes and how to prevent it. That's a humbling reminder of how much work remains. The second, Alzheimer disease. Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. This causes a tremendous anguish to families and often force affected people into nursing homes at enormous cost of society. The National Institute of Health and others are funding a great deal of research into the genetic and other factors that affect dementia risk as we age. But honestly, we don't yet know much about how people can protect themselves. And third, arthritis. It's not a major killer, so it doesn't appear on the leading cause of death list, but it can severely diminish quality of life, causing real pain and suffering in people's later years. Remember, public health fights disability, not just death. And arthritis is a perfect example of why that mission matters. Now let's pull the whole chapter together. The headline is this: chronic disease. Chronic diseases are now the leading cause of death and disability in the United States, with cardiovascular diseases and cancer at the top of the list, and diabetes rising rapidly as major source of disability. Preventing these diseases is a central public health priority, and the prevention always begin with understanding the causes. Here's the hopeful part. Our success with cardiovascular disease, where biomedical science and epidemiology together reveal the causes and gave us ways to prevent or delay it, serve as a model of what we hope to achieve with every other chronic disease. And our growing understanding of how normal cells work and what goes wrong when they turn malignant gives researchers real hope that we will eventually learn to prevent many kinds of cancer too. But let's stay honest. Despite the tremendous progress, there is still a great deal we don't know about what can go wrong with the human body and how to prevent it. People can't expect to live forever and perhaps wouldn't even wish to. But biomedical research holds the holds the key to preventing many premature deaths and reliving much of the pain and anguish people suffer toward the end of their lives. And because it offers exactly that kind of hope, the National Institute of Health work is generally well supported by both the United States Congress and American people. So that brings us to the end of this chapter. We have traveled from the shift away from infectious diseases through the methods scientists use and into the biomedical heart, biomedical uh, heart of cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes. The unifying lesson is simple but powerful. Understand the cause and you open the door to preventing. Thank you for your attention and see you in the next chapter, chapter 7, and goodbye.